Another really good idea for producing food on your own property is fruit trees. And instead of just planting a bunch of fruit trees out in the middle of the lawn in rows, we could arrange them to be more like trees grow in nature, which is more like in a forest. So in a forest, you have different levels of trees, the really tall trees and shorter ones, and then you have vines that crawl up things, and you've got tall bushes and short bushes, and then you have ground cover root crops. So you have all these different levels. So if you imitate that structure or design but put all food producing species in there, then you can have your tall shelter belt trees that protect from the wind, like we have these spruce here, and they're arranged in a horseshoe, so these spruce will grow up tall and block all the prevailing wind but collect full south sun. So you now have this big dark green backdrop to your horseshoe that generates heat, blocks the wind, and creates a microclimate inside that horseshoe. So those trees shield the elements and create this nice microclimate that's 5 degrees warmer and has less evaporation, collects more snow. And then inside you have your apple trees, pear trees, plum trees, cherry trees that are arranged near the back. And then the shorter bushes like cranberries and saskatoons can be more in the middle. And then the front you have your like honeyberries or hascaps and currants, and there's a whole variety of different things we can grow in Alberta. 21 different species of fruit, 115 different varieties of apples. So an apple tree really only takes up this much space in your food forest, like the size of the trunk, but it generates 400 pounds of food a year, and you didn't have to do any work to get that food. Really, it's just there year after year. And in a forest environment, just natural systems will mulch your ground and fertilize your trees and manage the moisture within there, so that's a lot less work for you to have to do to keep all those things thriving. So we have three different styles of food forest on Rancho Relaxo, or three different strategies, I guess, we're comparing against each other. We decided to plant a bunch of fruit trees in behind me here because we suspect this used to be a animal pen from years and years ago. The soil seems pretty fertile. The grass would grow like 8 feet tall in here. So we chose this we've got over 100 fruit trees planted in behind me. Granted, they're all fairly small. But as well, our shelter belt trees like this spruce are going to take a while before they're tall enough to actually shelter all these fruit trees from the elements. So luckily we already have an area with a bunch of mature poplar trees around us. So for now, those are our shelter belt. And then you can see these poplar saplings that are growing up. We just let them grow enough to protect the other trees, but then they're a dime a dozen, cut them out as they get too big and start to shade the fruit trees and rob moisture from them. So we're just kind of using the existing forest to help this new food forest get started. Then I have another food forest where we just planted right out in the middle of the grass, and we built a fence around it to keep the deer from eating the trees. We weren't sure if that was going to be an issue or not, so we just built the fence first and planted the trees inside there, and then we did a lot of amending the soil in there because it wasn't near as good as in this little spot. We added things like worm compost, or worm castings, sorry, alfalfa pellets, kelp meal, rock dust. We put 2 round bales of hemp straw in there and a few different things. So lots of different amendments to build the fertility of the soil. There's a lot more worms in the soil there now. And so those trees are doing pretty well. We just got our first cherries last fall out of that food forest. And then we have a third one on the go where we don't actually have any fruit trees planted in it yet, but we're just building the soil. So we planted a green living fence around the outside. So willow, Saskatoon, and sea buckthorn planted really close spaced beside each other. So those will grow up and create like a impenetrable barrier for people or deer. And it also produces food, and that's a fence that doesn't need repairing or rebuilding every few years. And then inside, we laid down poplar logs side by side like corduroy and covered those in alfalfa and different types of straw and compost. And then we put 2 round bales of hemp in there, I think, too, and a whole pile of manure pellets. So we're just building the soil first, and then in 10 years, plant the fruit trees in. And I bet you those fruit trees will grow way faster and catch up to the ones that have already been in the ground in the poor soil. So we're just trying out these different strategies to see what works. So we'll keep you posted. So another thing we might think about is why we might plant a food forest. Like, it takes a long time for these trees to really reach maturity and start producing enough food that you can be reliant on them. But some of these food forests, if they're, planted effectively, can take care of themselves. So you could go traveling for a few years and come back, and your farm is more fertile and more productive than when you left, versus a conventional farm that would just be acres of weeds and nothing fertile produced in that time. So it's a way that you can be a little more hands off. You can just let the land produce the food instead of you having to be out there working every day, putting those seeds in the ground, tilling the ground, pulling out the weeds, watering, feeding, protecting from frost, all those things. The forest just does that for you. And so that would be a legacy to leave your kids, or a gift to yourself in the future. That could be your retirement plan. Instead of putting away a bunch of money on a computer that could just switch off someday and there goes your retirement fund, instead you have acres and acres of fruit trees. And with those fruit trees come food, income sources, jobs for your kids or grandkids. You could have a winery or a juice pressing facility, or you could sell fruit or jams or all those things. So you could really set something up for your retirement income and a whole industry for your family. And that food forest could still be there in 500 years, as opposed to any, brick and mortar wood building that you might build, which might be gone in 50 years.